October 14th, 1944. Northern France. The shot wasn't supposed to happen. Staff Sergeant Robert Hayes had been in position for 6 hours, hidden in the ruins of a church bell tower that overlooked a crossroads 300 yards away. His mission was simple. Observe, report enemy movements, stay hidden, do not engage, under any circumstances. Those were the orders. Clear, unambiguous. Snipers didn't shoot unless authorized. They watched, gathered intelligence, remained invisible. That was the job. Hayes understood that. Had followed those orders on 23 previous missions. Never fired a shot without clearance. Never compromised his position by taking unnecessary risks. But through his scope, at 14:37 hours, Hayes saw something that changed everything. A German staff car. Black. Wehrmacht markings. Moving fast down the road toward the crossroads. Nothing unusual about that. German vehicles used these roads constantly. Hayes would have ignored it, logged it in his report, moved on. But then he saw who was in the car. Not through the scope. Not yet. Through binoculars. He'd been scanning the general area, checking approach routes, when the staff car appeared. And behind it, maybe 200 yards back, an American Jeep, olive drab, white star on the hood, traveling fast. Too fast for this sector, which meant someone important was in that Jeep. Hayes switched to his rifle scope. 4-power magnification. Not much, but enough. He could see the Jeep clearly now. Driver, 1 passenger in front, and in the back seat. Hayes's breath caught. 2 stars on the helmet. Major General, Division Commander. And the Jeep was heading straight toward the crossroads, where the German staff car was about to arrive, at the same time. Hayes did the math instantly. 30 seconds until the German car reached the crossroads. 45 seconds until the American Jeep arrived. If both vehicles reached that intersection at the same time, the Germans would see the general's Jeep. They'd recognize the rank insignia. They'd either capture him or kill him. Either way, the division would lose its commanding officer. Mid-offensive, when leadership mattered most. Hayes looked at his radio. Could call it in. Request authorization. But the radio operator was 3 miles away. Even if he responded immediately, which he wouldn't, it would take 2 minutes minimum to get clearance. By then, both vehicles would be at the crossroads, and it would be too late. Hayes looked through the scope again, at the German staff car. 300 yards, downhill shot, slight crosswind, moving target. Difficult, but not impossible. He could take out the driver, stop the car, give the American Jeep time to realize the danger and turn back. But firing meant breaking orders, meant revealing his position, meant compromising an observation post that had taken days to establish. And if he missed, if he revealed himself for nothing, the entire mission would be wasted. Hayes's finger hovered over the trigger. His training screamed at him to wait, to follow protocol, to call for authorization. But his instincts, built from 2 years of combat, 23 missions, and an understanding of what generals meant to offensives, told him something else. That sometimes the right decision wasn't the authorized one. Hayes made his choice the way all critical decisions are made in war, quickly, without overthinking, with complete commitment. He exhaled, found the rhythm between heartbeats, and squeezed the trigger. What Hayes didn't know yet, what he couldn't have predicted, was that his unauthorized shot would do more than save a general. It would expose a fundamental flaw in sniper doctrine, and force the Army to rethink everything it thought it knew about rules of engagement and the cost of absolute obedience. Who was Robert Hayes? Robert James. Hayes was born in 1920 in rural Montana, hunting country. His father was a game warden, spent his life in the mountains, tracking poachers, managing wildlife populations, and teaching his son everything he knew about patience, about stillness, about understanding that hunting, real hunting, wasn't about shooting. It was about waiting. Robert learned to shoot at age 8. His father gave him a .22 rifle and taught him one rule above all others. Never take a shot you're not sure of. One bad shot scares everything away. One good shot is all you need. Robert practiced that rule for 12 years. By age 20, he could hit a target the size of a quarter from 200 yards. Not sometimes. Every time. His father would set up increasingly difficult shots. Uphill, downhill, in wind, in rain. Robert adapted. Learned to read wind patterns by watching grass sway. Learned to compensate for distance by feeling how the rifle sat in his hands. It wasn't technical knowledge, not formulas or calculations. It was instinct. Built from thousands of shots, thousands of hours alone in the mountains, learning to be still, to wait, to take the shot only when it was right. When the war started, Robert enlisted in March 1942, told the recruiter he could shoot. They tested him. Standard marksmanship evaluation. Robert scored perfect. Not just perfect, impossibly perfect. 10 shots, 10 hits. At ranges most recruits couldn't even see clearly. "You're going to be a sniper," the training officer said. Robert didn't know what that meant at first, but he learned. Snipers were different from regular infantry. They worked alone, or in pairs, moved independently, set up observation positions deep in enemy territory. And when authorized, only when authorized, they took shots that could change the outcome of battles. By 1944, Robert had been deployed to Europe for 18 months, 23 missions, all of them observation, reconnaissance, intelligence gathering. He'd fired his rifle in combat exactly 4 times. All 4 had been authorized. All 4 had been successful. But Robert had learned something that no training manual taught. That sometimes the most important shot wasn't the one you were told to take. It was the one you saw coming before anyone else did. What Robert didn't know, what he was about to discover, was that his understanding of when to shoot was about to be tested in a way that would define not just his career, but the entire philosophy of how snipers were deployed and commanded. The intersection of fate. The German staff car reached the crossroads at 14:37 hours, exactly as Hayes had calculated. It didn't stop, just slowed slightly to navigate the turn. Hayes watched through his scope. Driver visible, 2 passengers in back, officers, probably. Hard to tell from this angle. The American Jeep was 40 seconds away, still approaching, still unaware of what waited ahead. Hayes's crosshair settled on the driver of the German car. Center mass, not the head. Headshots were from movies. In reality, center mass was more reliable. Larger target, more margin for error. And at 300 yards, with a moving target, error was likely. Hayes controlled his breathing. Slow, steady. The way his father had taught him, the way he'd learned in the mountains. 1 breath in. Hold, 1 breath out. Hold. Find the pause between heartbeats. That's when you shoot. The German car was in the intersection now, making the turn. Driver focused on the road. Hayes squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked. Sharp. Familiar. Through the scope, Hayes saw the driver slump forward. The staff car swerved, hit the curb, rolled to a stop halfway through the intersection, blocking the road. The passengers scrambled out, looking around, confused, trying to understand where the shot came from. Hayes didn't watch them. He was already scanning for the American Jeep. There, 300 yards back. Slowing. The driver had seen the stopped German car, had recognized the threat, was reversing, turning around, getting out of there. Fast. Hayes exhaled. It had worked. The general was safe. The Germans hadn't seen the Jeep clearly enough to pursue. Mission accomplished. But Hayes knew what came next. The Germans would triangulate his position, figure out where the shot came from. They'd send troops to investigate, maybe artillery. His observation post was compromised. He had to leave. Now. Hayes packed his equipment: rifle, ammunition, radio, 60 pounds of gear, and started climbing down from the bell tower, carefully, quietly, the same way he'd climbed up 6 hours earlier. By the time he reached the ground floor, he could hear German voices outside, shouting, organizing. They were coming. Hayes moved to the back of the church, through a collapsed wall, into the rubble of surrounding buildings. He knew the area, had mapped every route during his initial reconnaissance. 3 ways out. He took the longest one, not because it was safer, but because it was the least obvious. And in his experience, the least obvious choice was usually the right one. By 1500 hours, Hayes was back at the forward operating base, 3 miles away, exhausted, but alive. He reported to his commanding officer, Captain Morris. Mission compromised, sir. Had to abandon the observation post. Morris frowned. Why? Took an unauthorized shot. Silence. Morris stared at him. You, what? German staff car at the crossroads. American jeep approaching. Jeep had a 2-star general. Germans would have engaged or captured. I eliminated the threat. Morris's expression darkened. You fired without authorization. Yes, sir. You compromised a strategic observation post. Yes, sir. Do you understand what you've done? Hayes met his eyes. Saved a general, sir. What Hayes didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that the general he'd saved was someone far more important than either he or Morris realized. The general who changed everything. The general's name was Jonathan Pierce, Major General, 2 stars, commander of the 4th Infantry Division. He wasn't just any general. He was one of the most aggressive and successful division commanders in the European theater. His division had broken through German lines multiple times, had captured strategic objectives ahead of schedule, had earned a reputation for relentless forward movement. Losing him mid-offensive would have been catastrophic, not just for the division, but for the entire Allied advance, because Pierce understood something most commanders didn't: how to keep momentum, how to exploit German weaknesses before they could regroup, how to push forward when everyone else wanted to consolidate. And on October 14, 1944, Pierce had been traveling to a forward command post to personally oversee an attack that would begin in 6 hours. An attack that would punch through the last major German defensive line before the Rhine. If Pierce hadn't made it to that command post, if the Germans had captured or killed him at that crossroads, the attack would have been delayed, maybe canceled. The offensive momentum would have been lost, and the war in Europe might have lasted months longer. But Pierce had made it, because someone he'd never met had taken a shot without permission. When Pierce returned to headquarters that evening, he asked questions. Who was at that crossroads? Who stopped the German car? The answer worked its way up the chain, through battalion, through regiment, until it reached Pierce's desk. Staff Sergeant Robert Hayes, sir. Sniper. Observation mission. Fired without authorization. Pierce read the report, then picked up the phone. Get me Captain Morris. The conversation that redefined doctrine. Hayes stood in the division headquarters tent, at attention. Beside him, Captain Morris. Across from them, Major General Pierce. Hayes had never been this close to a general before, had never even seen one except in photographs. Pierce looked tired, but alert. Focused. He studied Hayes for a long moment, then spoke. Sergeant Hayes, you saved my life today. Hayes didn't know how to respond. Thank you, sir. Do you know who I am? Yes, sir. Division Commander. Do you know what would have happened if the Germans had captured me? Hayes thought about it. Attack would have been delayed, sir. More than that, the entire offensive would have stalled. We'd have lost momentum, given the Germans time to reinforce. Cost us weeks, maybe months. Pierce paused. You prevented that. With one shot. Without orders. Hayes said nothing. Pierce looked at Morris. Captain, what's the protocol for unauthorized fire? Morris straightened. Formal reprimand, sir. Possible demotion. Loss of sniper designation if the shot was unjustified. And was this shot unjustified? Morris hesitated. No, sir. But it violated standing orders. Orders that said what, exactly? Observation only. No engagement without authorization. Pierce nodded slowly. Captain, those orders exist for a reason. We don't want snipers firing indiscriminately, compromising positions, wasting ammunition. I understand that. Yes, sir. But those orders also assume that snipers can communicate with command in real time, that they can request authorization and receive it before the opportunity passes. Pierce looked at Hayes. Is that what happened today, Sergeant? No, sir. Radio operator was 3 miles away. By the time I could have requested authorization and received it, the engagement would have been over. So you made a judgment call? Yes, sir. Based on what? Hayes thought carefully. Based on threat assessment, sir. German staff car with armed officers on a collision course with American command vehicle carrying a general officer. Engagement was imminent. No time for authorization. Eliminating the threat was the only option that preserved American command capability. Pierce almost smiled. You talk like a tactics instructor, Sergeant. I think like a hunter, sir. My father taught me to recognize when a shot is necessary, not just when it's authorized. Pierce was silent. Then he looked at Morris. Captain, I want this incident used as a case study. Sniper rules of engagement. Adaptive decision-making in time-critical situations. Sergeant Hayes made the right call, not because he disobeyed orders, but because he understood when the orders didn't account for reality. Morris blinked. Sir, you want to use this as a positive example? I want to use this to change doctrine. We've been treating snipers like remote sensors, tools that wait for permission. But they're not tools. They're soldiers with judgment, experience, and situational awareness that command doesn't have. If we tie their hands with absolute restrictions, we lose the advantage they provide. Pierce turned back to Hayes. You're not being reprimanded, Sergeant. You're being commended, and you're going to help us rewrite the rules. What Hayes didn't realize, what he couldn't have known, was that his single shot would become the foundation for a complete overhaul of sniper doctrine across the entire U.S. military. The doctrine born from one shot. Within 6 weeks, Hayes's engagement at the crossroads had been analyzed by every sniper unit in the European theater, not as a violation, as a success. The analysis broke down every element: threat recognition, time constraints, communication limitations, decision-making under pressure. And the critical question, should snipers have the authority to engage targets without explicit authorization when circumstances warrant? The answer, after extensive debate, was yes, but with conditions. Snipers needed training in threat assessment, in understanding what constituted a time-critical situation, in recognizing when waiting for orders would result in mission failure or loss of life. By January 1945, a new doctrine had been drafted: Adaptive Engagement Protocol for Sniper Operations. It gave snipers limited autonomous authority to engage targets in 3 specific circumstances. 1. Imminent threat to command personnel. 2. Time-critical opportunity to prevent high-value enemy action. 3. Defensive necessity when communication with command is impossible. The protocol was controversial. Some officers argued it gave too much power to individual soldiers, that it undermined the chain of command. But others, including Major General Pierce, argued that it recognized reality, that in modern warfare, The person with the best situational awareness wasn't always the person giving orders. Sometimes it was the person on the ground, watching, waiting, and understanding what needed to happen before anyone else did. The doctrine was approved, implemented, and within months, snipers across Europe were operating under new rules. Rules that trusted their judgment. That gave them the authority to act when the situation demanded it. Hayes never trained other snipers, never became an instructor. He stayed in the field until the war ended, completing 17 more missions under the new doctrine. On 3 of those missions, he engaged targets without prior authorization. All 3 times, his actions prevented casualties, or achieved objectives that wouldn't have been possible under the old rules. What Hayes didn't know, what he'd never learn, was that his shot at the crossroads would influence sniper doctrine not just in World War II, but in Korea, in Vietnam, in every conflict that followed. That every sniper who operated with autonomous authority was using rules that Hayes's single decision had helped create. The hunter who came home. Hayes returned to Montana in 1946. Back to the mountains, back to the silence. He didn't talk about the war, not to his family, not to friends. When people asked, he'd just say, "I was in the Army, Europe, infantry." That was all. He never mentioned being a sniper, never mentioned the crossroads, never mentioned the general or the doctrine or the commendation he'd received. He went back to what he knew, hunting, guiding, teaching young men from the area how to shoot properly, how to wait, how to understand that pulling the trigger was the last step in a long process of patience, observation, and judgment. One of his students, years later, asked him about the war. "Did you ever have to shoot anyone?" Hayes was quiet for a long time. Then, "Once, I took a shot that mattered. That's all you need to know." The student didn't push. Hayes spent 43 years in those mountains, living the same life he'd lived before the war. Hunting, fishing, guiding. In 1989, a military historian researching sniper operations tracked Hayes down, asked him about the Crossroads incident. Hayes listened to the historian's questions, then said, "I didn't do anything special. I saw a threat. I eliminated it. That's what snipers do." "But you changed doctrine," the historian said. "You helped redefine how the military uses snipers." Hayes shrugged. "I took one shot. Other people made it into something bigger. That's not on me." "But do you think you made the right decision?" Hayes looked out at the mountains, at the same landscape where his father had taught him to shoot 6 decades earlier. "I made the only decision that made sense. General was in danger. I could stop it. So I did. That's not complicated." The historian thanked him, left, published a paper about Hayes's engagement. Hayes never read it. He died in 2001, age 81. His obituary mentioned his work as a hunting guide, his love of the mountains, his service in World War II. One line, just one, mentioned a commendation for actions in combat. That was all. No mention of the crossroads, of the general, of the doctrine that bore his influence. But in military training manuals, Hayes's engagement is still referenced, still studied, still teaching snipers that sometimes the most important shot is the one you're not supposed to take. The legacy of one shot. Today, every military sniper learns about autonomous engagement authority, the right to fire without orders in specific, time-critical circumstances. It's a fundamental part of sniper training, taught at every school, practiced in every exercise. But most snipers don't know where it came from. Don't know about a crossroads in France, about a sergeant who took a shot to save a general he'd never met, about the debate that followed, about the doctrine that resulted. They just know that when the situation demands it, when waiting for orders means losing the opportunity, they have the authority to act, to trust their judgment, to take the shot that needs to be taken. That's Hayes's legacy. Not fame, not recognition, just the quiet understanding that good soldiers don't just follow orders. They understand when the orders don't cover the situation, and they act accordingly. The shot that defined duty. Robert Hayes never thought of himself as a hero, never wanted recognition or praise. He'd done his job, taken a shot that needed taking, saved a life that needed saving. That was all. But in doing so, he'd proven something fundamental about what it means to serve. That duty isn't just following orders, it's understanding the purpose behind the orders, and having the judgment to act when the orders don't cover the situation you're facing. Hayes learned that in the mountains, from a father who taught him that hunting wasn't about shooting. It was about patience, about waiting, about taking the shot only when it was right. And he carried that lesson to war, where he discovered that sometimes the right shot is the one no one told you to take. That's not disobedience. It's not recklessness. It's the highest form of duty. Understanding your mission deeply enough to know when breaking the rules serves it better than following them. Robert Hayes took one unauthorized shot and saved a general and changed doctrine and taught generations that sometimes the most important decision is the one you make in the moment between receiving orders and pulling the trigger.